Okay, so I've taken the distributor out of the car. You could do everything that I'm about to do with this distributor still in place, but frankly, it's just a little bit easier to show. So there's a number of things here that can go wrong. And by the way, if you're watching the other video, if you've already seen it on how to adjust carburetors, this is one of the major components that is going to actually cause problems with the car. It's likely that 99% of carburetor problems stem from somewhere in here. So there's a few things that you want to check out. First of all, there's a vacuum piece. Some cars have a vacuum retard, some have a vacuum advance. And what it actually does, I'll show you with this vacuum gauge here. I'll mimic an engine vacuum. There. Yeah, it's actually a little strong for an engine vacuum, but you get the idea. Okay. So what we've just seen is that it moves the points plate. What does the points plate actually do? It changes the time that the points are going to be opened, right? It either advances it or retards it. In this case, it retards it because the distributor spins this way. So by moving the plate, what would be triggered right here now is going to be triggered a little farther down the line. That's basically how it's working. So now one thing that's important to know is that the vacuum retard, it's not just an emissions component. I get tired of reading that online. The vacuum retard gives you a wider range of advance curve, right? So at idle, yes, this is operating fully at idle, which means it's all the way retarded, or less advanced. More retard is the same as less advance. So you start with it more retarded. As the engine opens up the throttle, you get the retard capsule stops pulling, or at least it slows down. It varies based on engine load and engine speed and a number of things, but the vacuum capsule then has the effect of releasing some of that retard as you step on the gas, which has the same thing, by the way, as advancing the throttle. It's moving in the same direction. If you had a vacuum advance capsule here and the vacuum operated on that, it would be turning it this way. This just holds it back the other way until you step on the throttle, which releases it. It's still rotating the same direction. This is important. It's not just an emissions component, and I see that in a lot of forums. It's just not 100% accurate. So once that happens, then there's some weights that are inside the distributor. Now what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to take the rotor off, and you're supposed to oil this shaft because it's actually a two-piece shaft. And I can feel it, but if you have your distributor out of the car, you can do this. Hold the top firmly, rotate the bottom, and you'll be able to feel whether or not that shaft is kind of stuck. If it's in the car, you won't be able to rotate the bottom of the shaft. You should be able to see the top move there. And those weights, as they spin up, and that's based solely on RPM, those weights are going to cause the shaft itself to twist. And it's going to advance, again, you're going to advance the timing as the RPMs change. So it's very important to make sure that all of the weights and everything that are on the inside are not frozen, that they're not stuck, and then do your maintenance. If you're not going to oil your distributor from time to time, you're going to have problems down the line. I'm a strong advocate of having electronic ignitions in a car. It just makes it simpler. Your car's not going to break down if you're going to drive it all the time. You don't have to worry about cheaper components as long as you use a good quality ignition system. But just something to be aware of. Myself, I don't mind points. I'm kind of old school that way just because I enjoy, well, I'm basically masochistic, and anything that causes me pain in my life I probably will enjoy. But I'm going to show you how to set those real quick just in case you don't know. Pretty standard in most of the Triumphs anyway. I'm assuming most of the British cars are this way. You want to use a feeler gauge set of 15 thousandths, and basically, if you can see right here, this is the points. They're open when it's on that lobe, and the difference between the space, between those should be 15 thousandths. This is way too big. And so your timing is going to be off because your points are going to be opening too early. They're supposed to open here. They open here instead. Your points are opening too early. So it's sort of automatically advancing the timing. As your points wear, you end up with this little plastic bit, or it might be made of different components, but plastic bit, let's call it, on the points. Over time, that's going to wear because you've got your distributor that's spinning around, and that's a friction right there. And as it wears, you can see it's not going to be expanding and contracting as far here, and you're going to have to reset your points. So that's one of the big advantages to an electronic ignition, is that you don't have to worry about that wear because there isn't any. So it should stay a consistent timing. We do need to adjust the points, so we'll just loosen them. And then if you've ever wondered what these little notches are for, it's for moving the points back and forth so that you could adjust when they open and close. So get it to right on the lobe. And you want to adjust it so that that is at 15 thousandths. You should be able to just get the feeler gauge in and out, feel a friction, and you shouldn't see any movement on those points either. Once you have that, tighten the screw back down. Not too tight, you'll strip it, and double check your work. It should not have moved. If it did, it might take a number of tries, but you have to go through and do it again. Yeah, that's spot on. Now you can double check this with a dwell meter in the car. I happen to have one, but if you don't, this is going to be your best friend. If you're on the road, 15 thousandths, Google it on your phone. It's a couple of sheets of paper, basically. And so you can kind of mimic the same thing, maybe more than a couple, but you get the idea. Google it, find something that's similar with, put it in. You can set it in a pinch on the road. Some other important things. This right here, this flexible bit of wire, it is flexible for a reason, because as the plates turn, that wire needs to get out of its own way, basically. So if it can't do that, you're going to have problems inside the distributor. We already checked the vacuum. That's in good shape. If the vacuum is leaking, you're going to have not only an air leak here, which is going to throw off your carburetor mixture. You see my point. Make sure everything under here is in good shape. If it weren't, if we didn't have a pandemic going on and I could get parts, I would actually replace the points, but for just trying to make sure if the car starts or not, that's an important thing. So that's where we're at there. I'm also going to show you static timing, and that'll also, by the way, verify that your points are working in the first place. So I'm going to get the distributor back in the car. We will show you that. Actually, really quick, before I put this back in the car, I wanted to show you exactly how the points are working. Under the distributor, your points are basically a switch. That's all that it does. The way that your spark plugs fire, your coil charges. You get a positive voltage, goes through the coil, and when it stops charging, when something interrupts that standard 12 or 6 volts worth of current, depending on your setup, the current that's stored in the coil has nowhere else to go except out the top, and it goes through the coil. There's some physics and math wizardry that I'm not going to address. You can look it up, you can find plenty of information, but that's what's happening. And then the voltage is induced and it goes out the top of the coil. So how do we interrupt that current? Well, that's exactly what the points are doing. You see they're opening and closing? Okay. So the only point, you notice there's a wire that comes from your coil. That's this one. We've got that attached to this. By the way, see the current goes to 0 when it's a complete circuit. Okay. So right now, points are closed. Remember, your distributor is attached to ground. When the points are closed, you have a complete circuit. Points open, that circuit breaks, spark plug fires. Points close again, it's charging, it opens, fires. Charging, fires. Charging, fires. That's all that this does. It's a switch that just opens and closes thousands of times per minute, and that is what tells your spark plugs to fire. That's what controls it. So if the points gap is off, your spark plug is going to be firing either for too long, which means it's not going to have enough time to charge, or not long enough, which means you're not really going to get an adequate spark. And that could throw off a number of things, but the most common solution that people seem to seek out is, oh, we need to adjust the carburetors, it's not running right. That's not accurate. Do this first, otherwise you're just going to have to readjust the carburetors anyway. The condenser then, its only job, it's sort of a shock absorber. If you're opening and closing this thousands of times per second, there's going to be arcing across there. And so the condenser's job is to absorb some of that, act as a shock absorber, release the current when it's, I don't know if that's the accurate way to phrase it, but it's a shock absorber for the current that's going through the points so that you don't get an arc. If your condenser's bad, you'll get arcing in the points. They're going to wear a lot quicker, and it's not going to last very long, and you will be on the side of the road because your points aren't working right anymore. So that's basically everything under here. The vacuum and different mechanisms that advance it change when the points open and close. That's your distributor. That's all it does. And if you have an electronic ignition, its only job is to replace the points. It does exactly the same thing. It just does it a different way, generally more reliable. But if you understand it, you can start to figure out, okay, my car's not running. What exactly went wrong? And go from there. Now we'll get it back in the car. To static time your distributor, start at the front of the engine. There's going to be a spec in any shop manual that tells you where to set the static timing, and it's going to depend on your distributor number too. So look up the number that's stamped on the side of your distributor, figure out where your static timing is supposed to be, then go up to the crankshaft wheel, and you will notice that it's got degree markings on it. So in the case of the distributor I have, and this is most TR6s, but not all, there are some variances, the static timing is going to be 12 degrees before top dead center. So find that marking and line it up with the little pointer that you see. Once that's done, you can make your way back over to the distributor. Now over on the distributor, what we're basically trying to do is we've already set the crankshaft where we want it to be, right? We've got it 12 degrees before top dead center. We want number one piston to be firing. Convenient. Now this happens to be pointing at number 6 on this engine. It doesn't matter, 1 and 6 happen at the same time. The crankshaft goes around twice, but if you really wanted to be specific, you could just spin the crank around again. Anyway, take a look at the distributor cap. When it's in place, here's number 6. So you can see that the rotor's about to fire that piston, right? Okay. Get your test light, connect one end to the positive and one end to the wire that comes out of the distributor. Chances are pretty good you're going to see it light up. What that means is that the points are closed. We've got a complete circuit. It's going all the way through. We said that the points indicate that the spark plug should fire when the circuit breaks. Well, when the circuit breaks, your light's going to go out. So all you have to do, the distributor needs to be loose for this. Rotate the distributor the opposite direction of whichever way the rotor is going to spin until that light goes out. And right there is where we want it to fire. That's it. You can tighten it down. Or you could accidentally bump your distributor and move it around first. Okay, before we get to the carburetors, again, there's still more to check. You want to start with the coil. First of all, you want to make sure you have the right one. Some cars came with a ballasted ignition, others didn't. It's something that came right around 73. This car is a 73, but You never know if what you have is what you think you have, and so you want to check it out. The way to do it, disconnect whatever you have going to the distributor. You don't need that, but you want the positive wire on the positive end of the coil. You're going to want your multimeter, and what we're going to be looking for is voltage. And so if we go from the negative end of the coil to a known good ground, if you get something like battery voltage, then that's a sign that you do not have a ballasted ignition. If it's 6 to maybe up to 10, you probably have a ballasted ignition, and so you're going to need the coil that corresponds to that. So we've got the positive wire hooked up. Let's get the ignition just into the run position. Do not turn it to start. And you want to see what kind of voltage are you getting at a good ground. Ignore the negative sign. I can fix that just by reversing these, of course. That looks like battery voltage to me, and just to double check, here's my battery. Yeah. So because I'm getting battery voltage, either this car didn't come with a ballasted ignition, or somebody's removed it, or it's a different wiring harness, any number of things like that. So the next thing is to make sure that we've got the coil that corresponds to that. And for that, we're going to want to go down to the ohms part. We're measuring resistance here. Don't need this wire at the moment. And go ahead and turn your ignition off. And you're measuring the resistance across these terminals on the coil. Let's go down a scale. About 3.4. This is a 12-volt coil meant to go with a non-ballasted or 12-volt ignition system. If I had 1.5 volts at the coil, there's also a ballast. It could be a resistor. It could be a resistive wire. It might just be built into your harness. That's going to account for about 1.5 ohms. Sorry if I said volts earlier. That's going to account for about 1.5 ohms. The coil will take the other 1.5, and you're going to end up with that same 3 and change. And so because this one says 3 and change, this is a 12-volt coil. It is a non-ballasted system. I know this is correct. If you have the wrong parts in your car, what you could end up doing is either having potentially a weak spark, or you could be burning out your points frequently because you're putting the wrong voltage through them. So make sure all of this stuff is correct. If you're having problems getting your car to run right, again, this side of the engine is really where you want to start looking. If we weren't in quarantine right now because of the whole coronavirus debacle, I would have new plug wires, I'd have new plugs, but for the purposes of just trying to get this car to run, to see if I can get it started, this will be good enough. But rest assured, that's going to be the very next project that I tackle, is to replace all of those things as well.